Manchester United have been nothing short of a disaster this season defensively, with the worst defensive record of the club's Premier League era, which has led to condemnation, especially following that 4-0 defeat to Brighton this weekend, which means they will finish the 21-22 Premier League campaign with their lowest points tally in the competition history, fewer than the 64 points that we earned in the 13-14 campaign under David Moyes. The result also meant that United have now conceded 4 or more goals in 12 Premier League games since Sir Alex Ferguson retired, which is as many as Sir Alex Ferguson managed in the 810 games that we played under Sir Alex Ferguson. Only Southampton, Newcastle, Watford, Norwich and Leeds have conceded more goals than United this season in the league. The defence needs fixing in a big way. Here's how I think Ten Hag can get United back to being a bit meaner at the back. So the defensive principles and tactics of Ten Hag, we kind of covered a little bit previously in videos, but focusing specifically on the defensive aspect, I want to get into that today. Apart from in the 18-19 season when they were second, Ajax have topped the challenge intensity stats in every single one of Erik Ten Hag's campaigns. This indicates a defensive approach that is based on aggressive pressing, tackling and interceptions when the opposition have possession. From a 4-2-3-1 structure, the wide players would move inside to support the forward in limiting the central play through the middle of the pitch. Strong centre, force wide. Narrow positioning inside in the inside channels also allows pressure into wide areas. You almost kind of set traps for the opposition to go into those areas, and you can use the touchline then to pressure them into those areas. But the starting position is always very narrow, and being strong through the core is like a bit of a core tenet of what he's trying to do. In the moments where the ball is shifted wide, the centre forward would drop slightly, and he would look to maybe cover and screen the opposition pivot, because that's usually the way that teams would look to switch. If you get pressured into one side, finding that ball player, that sort of deep lying playmaker is usually the go-to for being able to switch it onto the opposite flank if you've not got players that have got a big switch in them. The number 10 can drop back, allowing a double pivot to support wider and also back the fullbacks up in those areas if required. And when the centre forward presses a little bit higher, the wingers will cover those wide areas as well. This is possible through work rate, and that's where the intensity of what Ten Hag comes in. You can't cover more than your manpower if you're lazy. It all starts with hard work, being aggressive. But what all of this does, the hard work in those kind of 4 or 5 players, your wingers, your forward, your 10, and we'll talk about what happens in a 4-3-3 in a second. So it's those 4 players. What those 4 players working hard enables is the 2 players that are sitting in front of the defence to be aggressive and to be very, very successful, and allows them to press forward centrally very, very aggressively, because they know that they've got pretty limited space anyway, and they've got time. They're not being dragged out of position because wingers aren't doing their job. They know I've got to patrol this area of the pitch. When the ball goes in there, I'm having it. When Ten Hag switches to a 4-3-3 with Ajax, there's a slightly different defensive approach. The central striker, most likely Haller, or usually Haller, he stays high rather than dropping in to cover that opposition pivot. This would suit Ronaldo, and would also suit Scamacca or David or Nunes or Schick or potentially any of the other strikers that we've been linked to or that we would like to see us sign. The wingers track opposing runs into the wide areas, especially if the fullback aggressively presses in the inside channels. And the number 8s would cover the inside channels very, very aggressively as well. Everything is about being strong through the centre of the pitch and forcing the opposition wide. They will individually jump out and try to win the ball back. And they will individually jump out to support the press in between the centre forward and the winger. This is a big one. This is a very important one, because this requires a defensive line to move right up behind. If you think about having a defensive line that's maybe only just outside the opposition half, hovering around the bottom half of the centre circle. And then you think where a midfield three would look or would sit if one of the midfield three has gone and pressed in between the winger and the centre forward, probably either a fullback or a left or right side centre half. There is a massive gap where that number 6 would like to operate. But if the defence pushes all the way up, creeps up an extra 10-15 yard, that gap's gone. And you're forcing a team to play in behind you. When you've got somebody like a Timber who is rapid, that's a mistake. This is why it's done. Being hyper aggressive and pressing the ball at one area of the pitch means that there's always space on a football pitch, right? If you squeeze a team over to the left-hand side, there's space on the right. If you sit back, there's space in front. If you push forward, there's space in behind. There's always space. You just have to identify where it is and how you want to play within that space. And there's always risk and reward with every single tactic you can play. This is why it's a game of chess. If you want to have a high pressing game to win the ball back where it's more favourable for you in the opposition half, you need to be able to recover it, and you need to know the 2, 3, 4 very likely balls that you're likely to get hit with in behind because you're playing such a high line. You can mitigate that with people who can read the game well, and you can mitigate that with defenders who can cover ground physically very well. And that's why Ajax have been successful, because that's what they do. They have a technical ball-reading defender. They have one that's absolutely rapid who will get his arse back and be able to do it. Again, in that 4-3-3, while the wingers are supporting back, the central midfielders, because it'll be one that goes, not two that go. Let's say it's your left side number 8 that pushes off into that line and tries to press and tries to stop that long ball actually coming. You've still got 2 midfielders. Those 2 midfielders are going to drop and they're going to become solid again in front of the centre-backs. There's always 2 midfielders in front of the centre-backs. This is commonly known as a bit of a rest defence. Typically, this will be set up while you're in possession. So you're looking to try and manipulate your team into quite... Here's where there's a dichotomy. You want width because you want to be able to use as much of the pitch as possible, but you want to be narrow or narrow enough that if you lose possession, you can get into good positions to be able to recover it. A resting defence is a defence that's in position, ready for when you lose the ball, and then you can react and win it back. And you want to be solid through the middle. You want to let people go to the wide areas, be solid through the middle, and that's where you're more likely to stifle an opposition's attack or a counter-attack. Pressure on the ball is the big one. Ten Hag's side are compact in defensive transition thanks to the way their fullbacks are inverted. Again, bit of a rest defense kind of thing. That's one of the main reasons why I think it's done. But a settled defensive play is where the very, very best of teams get tested. Every Premier League team is good enough to keep the ball for long periods, so you've got to be compact and you've got to be unified, and that's everything that United haven't been this season. We've been open and we've been disjointed. In settled defensive play, Ajax are quite Liverpool-esque. It is a narrow 4-3-3. The 2 wide players will look to invert. The midfield players will go man for man in the centre of midfield, and the fullbacks look to push on to support that press. The common theme that runs throughout Ten Hag's defensive approach is the individual jumping out and pressing and trying to win the ball as an individual aggressively. Very, very, very aggressive. Whether that's a centre-back that pushes out to deal with a dropping attacker, which is nerve-shredding, but that shows the confidence that he's got in his individual players. Whether that is a number 8 pushing forward to press a pivot that's dropped to try and get rolled out to try and get into a little bit of space. Ten Hag wants players that work assertively to work forward to win the ball back, even if it means leaving the defensive line. He will still go with a +1 at all times in defence, but someone darting out of defence is not uncommon to see. It puts constant pressure on the ball. It constantly means that the opposition never really get a chance to settle, and if you don't get a chance to settle, you don't get a chance to have your head up. If you don't get a chance to get your head up, you don't get to select the best options. Sometimes you can get forced into just knocking it around somewhere, but you're not actually progressing anywhere. It means that when they have that sort of really compact kind of mid-block, it forces the opposition backwards, it forces them around, and it forces them away from goal. And it's effective. While United are in the bottom 5 in the league this season when it comes to defensive pressures in the attacking third, it seems like something is absolutely going to change. We are far too easy for opposition teams to play against. And if Ten Hag brings one thing to Old Trafford with him, it is that aggressive front foot defending that we need to see. One of the things that we thought we'd see from Ralph Rangnick, and clearly this team aren't ready to do it. He's going to have to recruit, he's going to have to promote, and he's going to have to bring in players that are willing to do the hard yards. I'm hoping some of the reason that we've seen United so reluctant to press like this, so reluctant to work like this, is half of these players don't think they're going to be here next year, and they've just tossed it off. I'm not happy with that. I'm hoping that's mitigation for what we've seen, because that means if it is, we've got half a chance of seeing something different next season. Otherwise, it's just going to be the same. And there's obviously plenty of links coming out in terms of defensive recruiting signings. There's a lot of talk about different defenders coming in. I think a midfielder that can take the ball and also do things with the ball and off the ball would be equally important, because that back four, despite the individual mistakes that the back four have made this season, and there's been plenty, they still do need a little bit of help from a really good midfielder to stop them being exposed. And that could be a big turning point, as much as the technical aspects that we've been lax on. The most recent link, according to Tuttersport and Sports Witness, is Dumfries. Previously been linked with Timber, with Pau Torres. Whoever United decide to sign, they need to change their approach and not pay over the odds like we did with Maguire, Wan-Bissaka and countless others. We need to just go and get good signings, your 20, 30, 40 million pound signings, not the 50, 60, 80, 90 million pound signings, because United needs so many players. I said this earlier, if you went out and signed Declan Rice and Harry Kane for this team, we're going to be fucking sixth again next year. We need major surgery, like Ralph said. We need to really cut this team down. And to do that, you're going to have to bring in a lot of signings, because you know what? Some of them won't work. And you need to be able to mitigate the ones that don't work by having enough around them that does work. Hopefully Paul Mitchell joins the club. Hopefully that's something that sees that sort of recruitment go into overdrive. But he needs to target players that can also play the Ten Hag way. Players comfortable on the ball. Players that comfortable being aggressive, comfortable pressing, comfortable working their balls off as a minimum standard. Players with the ability to be dynamic, recover, play high. And you know, we have a problem at the moment with players that are just uncomfortable on the ball, like Wan-Bissaka, or ineffective on the ball, like McTominay, like Dalot. We need well-rounded footballers. We get that with the right mentality and the right character, and United can start to turn this thing around. And Ten Hag can start to turn this thing around. Defensively, we've been embarrassing. Let's start it. Hey, thank you for watching the video. If you are new around these parts, then don't forget to subscribe. My channel is proudly supported by my community on Patreon. If you'd like to get a little bit of extra content, a Discord group, meetups, five-a-side games, weekly podcasts, behind the scenes, and even an occasional bit of transfer news as and when I get it, then for the price of a pint, you can show your appreciation for the content that we make and get some goodies for doing so as well. Check the link in the description or click the button right here. You'll also find all of my socials here too if you want to follow me on any of those platforms. Nice one.